Eek. Sounds a bit feedbacky. Good afternoon and welcome to this special meeting of the Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to inform those present this meeting is being webcast live and will be capable of repeated viewing. Are there any members in attendance as substitutes today? I don't think there are there? Because everyone is invited from all the committees. We have two apologies from Mary Davies from the Elder People's Council and Councillor Loughran. Do any members wish to declare any interest in relation to the matters included on the agenda? No? Good. Okay, we have no part 2 items today, so the press and public won't be excluded. So we are holding another special Place Overview and Scrutiny meeting to look at the ongoing programmes of devolution and local government reorganisation for Sussex and Brighton. We will look at LGR first, and then we will move on to devolution. We are being asked to note the updates on both devolution and local government reorganisation and to make any comment on the public engagement survey presenting the boundary options for LGR. As this subject has an overlap in remit, we have invited the members of both People and Health Overview and Scrutiny Committees to attend and provide input if they wish to. We are joined today by Councillor Sankey, Leader of the Council, Councillor Hewitt, the Cabinet Advisor on Devolution and Local Government Reorganisation, who will be presenting. We also have Liz Colbert, Director for Governance and Law. Online, we have Rachel Kelly, Programme Director for LGR. So they're on hand to help with any questions. We also have in the room Lucy Spicer from the policy team and two consultants, Julian Osgathorpe and James Stainer. I'd like to welcome all to the meeting. So public involvement, there are no questions. There are also no member questions. So we'll move straight on to the local government reorganisation section of the meeting. Councillor Hewitt, would you like to present to the committee?
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you for inviting us along to present to Joint Scrutiny Committee. So if you could skip over to the first slide, please. Thanks, Chair. So this is a bit of background to what was covered in the last OSC committee we attended in early June, but of course, since then, the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, as it's called, has been published, which has provided us with quite a lot more detail regarding local government reorganisation and, of course, other areas, some of which we'll cover later on today. One of the sort of main headlines since we last met in June was that our second round of engagement with Brighton Hove residents and stakeholders commenced on the 25th of July, and that is running until the 25th of August. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Thanks, sir. So the government have set out a criteria for the proposals for any submissions for local government to reorganisation, ensuring that they're viable. The ones which are deemed to be so will be shortlisted, and there'll be a statutory consultation taking place, which is being run by the government, and the criteria which we're sort of being benchmarked against, as you can see, it's ensuring there's functional geography and community identity, financial resilience of the new authorities and ensuring that they can deliver integrated services and public support in them, and whole wards should be used as the building blocks for building any potential new geographies. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So Brighton Hove's position, obviously that was submitted as part of our interim response in March, which was went to Cabinet and then back to this committee in June. We've really sort of drawn on those themes from our response. So as we'll come across later today, are options for merging with other authorities are quite moderate, as we're taking into account how people live their lives and use their services across the boundaries. And we're going to submit one proposal to government that will be informed, along with the survey which we're running, analysis of evidence and data which we obviously share with other authorities. And finally, we support the creation of unitary authorities across the region which are balanced, financially sustainable and deliverable. Move on to the next slide, please. So we've received some updates from MHCLG, which is Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, since then, which has formed part of the response and survey going forward. So there's a very strong emphasis on there needing to be a strong transitional period between now and any new authorities being set up, and a real understanding from existing authorities that any decisions which are being made in the interim period are having to take into account any potential new boundaries and new unitary authorities. If you move on to the next slide, please, which is the timeline of the next steps. So as stated, we've got our survey engagement running between 25th of July and 25th of August. Once that's completed, and what's going on at the moment, we're building an evidence base to ensure that our proposal will meet the government's criteria. That will go to a decision to be made at Cabinet on the 25th of September, and then the following day is the deadline for us to make our submission to the government. As stated earlier, they will be running a statutory consultation as part of this process on any sort of shortlisted proposals which they have received. We expected that to be running between November and January of next year, with a final decision made in March. Then legislation will go through the various houses, etc., in Parliament to establish the new councils, and we expected they'll be fully up and running, operational in April 2028. We can move on to the next slide, please. This is covering our engagement. So as we said at the last Scrutiny Committee, I feel that engagement is a very important part of this process. Whilst in Brighton Hove, we can only proactively engage with residents in our existing footprint. We are, however, accepting comments from residents in neighbouring authorities as well. They'll be identified when they submit their responses on Your Voice, so we can easily collate and sort of have a breakdown of the responses depending on where residents live. We currently haven't got a preferred model, or for the models which we're presenting as part of engagement, we're all open for all of them, just ensuring that as long as they're viable for that. We're attending a public meeting tomorrow in Saltdean, as well as drop-in sessions at libraries along the sort of eastern parts of our city, and we'll obviously be promoting via social media and other forms of advertisements to sort of generate as much publicity as possible, and of course engaging with partners such as our NHS, education and voluntary community sector colleagues. If you could move on to the following slide, please. So it's just a bit more detail of what we're doing to engage with members of the public. So a survey is live at the moment, and we are having like a stronger focus with our events in the east of the city as we'll come on to our proposals, obviously sort of focusing more on that part. Lewes District Council have since run a parallel survey, which is asking their residents what their views on our proposals are, and we've had an agreement to share the raw data with each other following the end of the consultation period. Stated we've got a public meeting in Saltdean tomorrow evening, and the 4 drop-ins, 2 of which are in Saltdean, 1 in Rottendean and 1 in Woodendene, all at various times of the days to try and really encourage uptake with residents. Move on to the following slide, please. So the survey's been running for, this is the 6th day now. As of earlier today, we've received 433 responses, which is quite a good uptake in a reasonably short period of time, with probably the least amount of proactive engagement in that time as well. Obviously, we'll, like I say, with the drop-in sessions, we're expecting more uptake as we go. There's been some sort of early themes, as you can see, highlighted on there, but obviously it's still quite early to do a full deep dive analysis into those. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. And these following slides are a breakdown of each of the 4 proposals which we're canvassing comments on. So the first option, as you'll see, this includes East Saltdean and Telscombe Cliffs ward, and the 3 wards which make up Peacehaven, which is Peacehaven East, North and West. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So we feel that this option has a lot of existing connections with our city at the moment. There's residents in those wards use our schools, hospitals, the public transport and leisure facilities, and of course commuting to and from for work. It includes the Kemp Town and Peacehaven parliamentary constituency, so residents in those parts already sort of have a shared democratic representation with residents in the east of our city already. But of course, and this goes throughout all the options, there is going to be that maintenance, the distinct identities of those places and communities will be maintained throughout as well. We can move on to the next slide, please, which is our option B. This is an option which includes those wards I just mentioned, but along with Kingston ward, which is dark blue on your top right of the page. That includes Falmer Village and Kingston Village and other sort of very sort of smaller settlements in that area. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So with Kingston as well, we respect and understand it's a rural in its character, but our evidence will show that residents in that area does access our city, particularly with the offerings via the A27 and it was based over at Falmer. We've obviously got the 2 universities on that part of the boundary as well. And obviously this will incorporate a lot of the Downlands estate, where we obviously have a lot of the Downlands sort of estate within our existing unitary already. And we have obviously good and existing relationships with South Downs National Park. If you could move on to the next, thank you, which is option C. So this is similar to option A, where you've got East Saltine, Telscombe, and the 3 Peacehaven wards, but this one also includes 2 wards in New Haven, which are New Haven Valley and New Haven, Denton, and Meechin wards. If you can move on to the next, thank you. So we feel there's going to be sort of benefits for merging with wards, those 2 wards in addition. There's obviously the shared public transport networks on there and opportunities for regenerating along the coast. There's also a very sort of strong emphasis that this would support our economic and environmental strategies and plans up on a larger scale along the coast. And it's a real opportunity as well to draw on our city's existing strengths in culture, creativity and digital sectors. And the final option we're consulting on, option D. So that, as you'll see, is a model of all of the wards which I discussed. That would have the largest population size, as you can see, just shy of 316,000 at the moment. We feel that this option, would be large enough to meet the government's criteria for being resilient and efficient, but also local enough to keep that accountability and the local identity. Towns and parish councils which fall within those boundaries will still play their important key role and could also, evolve if needs be. Feel that all sort of neighbourhoods in those areas do share healthcare, education, transport and employment services, and that would allow for better service planning as one unitary authority, and would also join up infrastructure investment, including along the coast. We've got our flood defences and the transport network, which is already established. And with the final slide, please, it's just a sort of final reminder and prompt to everyone that there's a great opportunity to be involved in this, in responding to, sharing and promoting the consultation and engagement, along with residents in all your wards, any groups of communities, ensuring that their voices are heard as part of this consultation. And of course, any feedback from today's committee meeting as well will form a valuable part of our engagement. Thank you, I'm going to hand over to Bella now, and then opportunity to hand over back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Bella.
Thanks very much, Chair, and great to be here before the committees to discuss this really important subject in the development since we last met last month. Not much to add to a very comprehensive and clear presentation, I think, from Councillor Hewitt. Safe to say that since we last met, we've done some more internal thinking, some more internal analysis on what is going to work for not just residents here in the city, but our neighbours and across the whole region. We've brought forward a set of proposals to discuss today, and we've also been seeking to speak with elected representatives that are in the areas impacted by the proposals that we've put forward. This is clearly a really iterative process. As Councillor Hewitt has said, we don't have any sort of final preference in terms of our thinking, and we're really keen to hear from residents and community organisations and anyone that has got a view or some lived experience that might have a bearing on this over the course of the consultation. To my mind, at present, I think it's clear that government's objectives in terms of trying to build more financially resilient local authorities, trying to ensure that residents are getting good value, that services are properly joined up, that we're getting economies of scale, and that we're kind of leaning into our challenges and trying to improve the quality of services that we're providing, are really clear and really important. I think the proposals that we're putting forward have got the potential to achieve those things. And that's obviously something that we now need to test and hear from people on. But I do think there are real opportunities in these proposals. And, just already since the consultation has been launched and some of the conversations that I'm having, it's certainly sparking ideas about how we can do things better, how we can ensure that we are celebrating the uniqueness of many of our communities, both those within the city, but those that are potentially impacted by this. While also trying to make some real gains and shift the dial on some of those wicked issues that I think have been frustrating residents in some places for some time.
Thank you both very much, and welcome to Jess Gibbons, the CEO of the council, who arrived too late for me to introduce you. Welcome. That's fine. Right, questions. Ollie, Jackie, Todd.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation, Councillor Hewitt, Councillor Sankey. I've got a few sort of high level questions, really, not specifically about the options or the consultation, but sort of pertinent to LGR. And I'm looking back at the paper to this committee, I think, or possibly to Cabinet in March, and drawing through to where we are today. So in the March paper, there was a table around an evidence-based approach to LGR to support devolution and a high-level programme plan. And there are a number of actions against months, including on LGR, developing a scoring system, cost-benefit analysis, assessing risks, sensitivity analysis, validating data, peer reviews, all that stuff. As we're in scrutiny, I just wondered if well, obviously not now, but at some point, we would have access to some of that sort of background thinking, because we've had quite a sort of high-level presentation here. That's sort of question one. It's a question about costs, deliverability. Financial deliverability is a key part of this under the financial implications element of the paper. There are costs associated with this. We're projecting an overspend towards the end of this year. And is financial deliverability a risk which you are monitoring for the programme? And two more. Is there a formal or informal view from the unions, from Unison and GMB, on LGR and devolution? And is there an assessment of the overall economic impact of the proposals? And is that sort of part of the benefit cost ratio calculation? So sort of four quick and easy ones there. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Sykes. I think I noted them down. Let me know if I'm getting anything wrong. On financial ability, that is absolutely, obviously, a key criteria that government has set out and something that we are very mindful of. And so we will be, we're in the process of assessing options and thinking against, a whole range of criteria, but that being a really key one, because we want to build resilient councils that will withstand, future-proof them and ensure that they will be, robust for the future. On the unions, I'll ask in a second, I think, Jess to come in, because I think we've recently met with both of the recognised unions to talk this through. In terms of the data and sort of sharing the analysis, so I'd say the process is still ongoing. Obviously, we are needing to share data with neighbouring authorities and then analyse that data. So it's kind of in train, that process. But, very happy to share anything that's in a kind of shareable state in terms of analysis as and when. That's absolutely fine. And then, yes, definitely on overall economic impact, I think that's going to be really significant and will be part of the analysis that we do. I think that we're very mindful of where the city is currently positioned economically, which is that we are an economically successful city. There are various metrics that demonstrate how, as a city, we're doing very well in terms of economic growth, in terms of new businesses starting up and progressing, in terms of contribution we make to our regional economy, and you can see that through travel to work patterns and so on. And I think something we're particularly keen on is understanding how this process and these proposals potentially can contribute to future economic output, because obviously some of the challenges that we have in the city are, the ability of businesses to have the capacity to grow and to scale up. We know that is a pretty long-standing challenge. And then we also know that in some of the places that we are considering merging with and have put in these proposals, they are looking for growth and regeneration opportunities and jobs, and then the skilling up that goes with that. So we're hoping that we can, get to a place where actually there are going to be sort of mutually advantageous benefits to any proposal that we take forward, particularly on economic growth. Jess, did you want to come in on unions?
Thanks, Bella, and thanks, Chair. Councillor Sykes, so I have met with the unions, both GMB and Unison, and shared these proposals and talked them through with them. I don't think it's for me to comment on their formal position. I'm sure they will do that themselves publicly. At the moment, because our proposals are very early days, I'm really pleased that they are working really positively with us. And I think as we get more detail around the options that we're going to go forward with and how that impacts, they will absolutely be working alongside us in assessing that and ensuring a really good position going forward. I know that because we're an existing unitary, we are in a much stronger position than those for the districts and the counties that will be abolished through this process as new unitaries are created. And so I think our unions are rightly more concerned about what's happening in the broader picture and how that impacts the staff of those organisations more regionally than they are at the moment in terms of what's happening here. But I'm very pleased to say that they have committed to and they will continue to work alongside us to make sure we do that well.
Can I come back on one point, which is about financial deliverability? I wasn't quite clear in your response, Councillor Sankey. I thought you were talking about sustainability rather than deliverability. I understand sustainability in this context to be about the medium term, about how the new setup would cope financially over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. Deliverability is more about delivering the immediate programme, and obviously there are discretionary costs associated with what we're doing now, and we're under some financial pressure as a council.
Apologies, Councillor Sykes, I think I misunderstood. We've been talking about financial sustainability, and then deliverability, as you say, is separate, but also linked. So yes, both of those things I think are key, along with some of the other objectives that government has laid out. But yes, deliverability and having a set of proposals that can be, practically stood up in a way that isn't going to, cause issues for our residents and cause issues in terms of service delivery is really important.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got 3 questions. And looking at this, and I've looked at all the options that there are, and I think they're really interesting. And obviously, these mainly they do come under Lewes District Council and their district councils. We have an odd situation where the MP for Kemptown and so on, his constituency stretches out further than we have councillors. It's really quite bizarre because you're going into district councils. But how, let's say, people wanted to go for option 4, how would those areas, and this kind of in a way takes us to devolution, which is why it's confusing, how would they be represented politically? Because in all of this, you obviously want to retain that element of democracy and people having a say in things. So I think that's probably an area of slight confusion. The other thing is about costs, because we're a unitary authority. And so if we expanded, and we're talking about these economic costs and so on, I would just sort of, because some of these areas are sort of, especially going into the Kingston area, you've got rural areas and so on, about things like home to school transport, I would ask questions about, and adult social care, which are high cost areas. So that's question 2. And also, you were talking about what Brighton has to offer. And I think one of the biggest things is our sort of incredible kind of digital economy, all our young budding companies and so on. And I think that a wider area, if we incorporated, more of these areas as it's being proposed in this, I think that could be quite attractive to people because, how can I put it? There's limit to where people can actually have their offices in Brighton and Hove and so on. And I can see that being quite a successful area in the future. So those are just my 3 questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Quinn. I'll take the first answer. So yes, so how will those residents be represented? So of course, how their councillors will make up for their areas on the new unitary authority, so they'll receive that level of representation. They'll have towns and parish councils, which will still remain. They'll have that level of engagement with those bodies. And like I say earlier, there's always scope for towns and parishes to evolve as well within this. They really are valued in the bill. There's quite a strong emphasis on that, as well as at the moment, obviously, if you live in that area, you would have your district or borough councillor for some services and a county councillor for other services. Now you would just have, with this proposal as a unitary, you would just have one representative or 2, depending on the size of the area, to engage with for all your local government questions and queries, which all the services they provide. So it would be streamlined. In fact, you wouldn't have to find out which one of your councillors to go to. It would just be one, such as what we have here already. And of course, the parliamentary function would remain as it is. You would still have your member of parliament for those functions.
Thanks, Councillor Quinn, for the questions. Just add to Councillor Hewitt's response there that as part of our final submission, we would need to talk about any boundary review that might be needed in terms of those wards and the number of councillors for representation as well. But absolutely, as Councillor Hewitt says, those more localised governance structures of town and parish councils would absolutely remain. And I think it's important to emphasise that every area and every community has its own uniqueness and its own sort of way of doing things, its own history, its own sense of place and identity and community. Within our city, we already have, I think, fabulous diversity in that sense. So we've got Rottingdean Parish Council that will have its way of doing things. In other parts of the city, we've got community organisations and other entities that kind of serve that role and engage with the council on behalf of residents. And I think it's really important to allow flexibility and to enable communities to decide their own arrangements for how they want to engage. And as Councillor Hewitt says, the bill's very clear that government is not trying to impose a kind of one size uniform approach to that local governance. If these proposals to merge and option 4, as you've identified, were to go ahead, that would be a significant shift for us as a city in terms of the number of parish and town councils. And we would need to think about, okay, how do we organise ourselves to make sure we've got the mechanisms and the relationships in place to be able to be engaging, hearing resident priorities, working that into what we're doing as a unitary council. I think all of those considerations are really key and really important. On providing services in a more rural area, I think your second question, Councillor O'Quinn, that's obviously something we need to give some consideration to. So part of the process at the moment that we're undertaking is to share data with, receive and share data with other councils in the area, so including Lewis District and East Sussex County Council, to try and help us identify the costs in terms of providing services in these other places that we're proposing a potential merger with, so that we can kind of work that into our financial analysis and have, as good as possible an evidence base for saying, we understand how, the cost of delivering these services might be more because it's a more rural place and there's further to cover. Let's work that into our analysis and make sure we've got a really clear understanding of what the overall costs will be and how we would meet those costs. And then on your third question around the digital economy, again, I think that's something really to emphasise. I think we have a huge amount of digital activity in the city. Actually, earlier this month, I hosted Evolved. I went and introduced Evolve 25 at our Corn Exchange, which was done in collaboration with Innovate UK. This is the first kind of big national tech conference in the city, which I think is really significant, shows just how much we are doing and our small and medium-sized businesses are doing and how much potential there is. And I know as a council, we're really starting to engage more and more with our digital and tech and AI businesses, and to really try and ensure that we are leveraging that and all that does for the wider regional economy, which is so important. So I think there could be some really exciting opportunities in that. And that's something I'm really keen to speak to residents about, both in the city, but also in our neighbouring areas that I think, might want to understand our city economy more.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
We're all aware that this is another special meeting of Place Scrutiny. Every other week seems to be a special meeting. And I think that just reflects the speed of these proposals. It does worry me that when every meeting's a special meeting, what is actually going to be special? And what worries me is, and I'd like comments from both Councillor Hewitt and Councillor Sankey, is the speed of this consultation and the speed of change. And I think us as a scrutiny committee, because of that speed, have obviously had guests, fellow councillors back here twice now, but we haven't had the chance to invite other community organisations from any of the areas that seem to be affected in those options. Obviously, we've got Mark, we've got Adam, valued members of this committee, but I would have liked to have heard further voices, wider voices from those areas. I'm a convert of local government reorganisation. I've watched devolution in Manchester, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, GMCA, develop over a number of years. So I believe in devolution, but I think what can weaken it is both public awareness, public interest, and public involvement. So I'd like your assurance that A, you realise that this is high speed, and B, what can we do other than those 4 meetings, some deep dives with organisations that Councillor Hewitt has pointed out? What else can we do to raise awareness of, for me, the potentials of LGR and devolution? Thanks.
I think so, Councillor Goddard, and every meeting you attend is special. It's definitely a very ambitious timeline set by government. I don't think anyone could sort of sit here and pretend it isn't. But I think it just goes to show that, it's something which we've really got to sort of grasp and work with at pace. Despite, the ambitious timelines which have been set, and I'm pleased we've, as part of this, been able to hold an initial 2-week engagement as part of this process throughout, and this survey which we're undertaking now is a full 4 weeks. So feel that despite the tightness of it, we have got a great opportunity to get as many voices as possible and collate those along with the data and evidence. It'd be great if a scrutiny committee could facilitate the voices of those bodies which you mentioned. I know obviously here today we do have our community and voluntary sector health bodies, and older people councils have been invited as well. So, but of course, outside of these meetings as well, as part of the engagement, we will make as much effort as possible to facilitate meetings, to hear those voices for it, and any way which members here can get as many more voices around the table, either in a forum like this or outside, will be greatly appreciated and beneficial.
Thanks very much for the question, Councillor Goddard. I think it's a really important one. And Councillor is absolutely right to acknowledge the speed and just how ambitious the timelines are. As Councillor Hewitt said, we are trying to do as much as we can within those timelines to engage, consult, and do it in a meaningful way. So, I think the fact that we're having public meetings and drop-ins is a positive thing. That wasn't something we were able to do with the 2-week engagement exercise. But there again, I think we were possibly the only council that did an engagement exercise at an earlier point to try and shape our thinking. I think it's important to be clear that after our proposals and everyone's proposals go in September, the government will then do a further consultation. As I understand it, it will either be on one proposal or more than one proposal. So there will be a further statutory consultation on any proposed local government reorganisation, which will give another opportunity to engage residents and really hear their concerns, hear their ambitions for their places, so that there is more to play out. And then I suppose the other thing I would say, and I think this is an important part of the conversation, is that certainly devolution, and I would also say local government reorganisation, are part of our Labour government's mission to deliver change in people's communities. That was very much our mandate last year, was that people needed and wanted to feel and see change. Whether that's pride in place, whether that's improving services, whether that's ending the sort of managed decline that the previous government seemed at times proud to oversee. So to my mind, actually bringing about fundamental changes that are going to improve services for residents can't come quick enough. And actually, when I'm out on the doorstep, people are telling me that they want to see change, they want to see improvements, they want to end the managed decline. So I think we've got to hold two of those things in our mind. This process by its very nature is going to take time. I think, by the time we get to the other end of the process of devolving and reorganising our local government, we won't say, that was quick. It's going to be a lengthy process. So there will be opportunities for engagement, but it's also, I think, quite important to kind of get on with that mandate of change that the government is really understandably keen to see.
Just a quick follow-up, Chair. I also noted your both of you, your pertinent comments about the digital economy and how that's going to power growth. I mean, in the spirit of humility, whilst Brighton Hove might be an economic lung for the region, for Sussex, we also have to accept there's some major developments within the digital economy right across the area. And I think that's really important to note. Do you think this is empire building by Brighton and Hove City Council?
No, I wouldn't say that, Councillor Goddard. The government's been very clear that authorities have got to submit proposals for new unitary authorities on a scale so they're financially sustainable and can deliver the services to residents. any new unitary authority which is going to be created within Sussex, potentially could be up to 5 of them, will be new entities in their own right, and within that they will still maintain their the identity of the communities and places of the people which they'll be the governing authority for.
Really good questions, Councillor Goddard. If I could just also add, I think you're absolutely right to point out that there is a huge amount of activity and success in our digital and innovation economies outside of the city. I chair the Greater Brighton Economic Board and have had the privilege of visiting and going to see some of the real, genuinely trailblazing work that is going on. Only recently we were at the University of Sussex looking at the atom being split by quantum technology, and they are putting that into practice and actually delivering potentially life-saving medical advances. This is really, really world-leading important stuff that is, to a certain extent, I think, being generated and incubated in this city, but then clearly sort of powering the economy. And there is already, I think, a lovely sort of interchange going on. So I'm anecdotally hearing that many of our digital businesses are moving out to New Haven, for example, already. There is already, I think, that kind of conversation going on and that movement going on. So I think there's potential here to kind of accelerate and amplify some of what's already happening, which is exciting. And then to your point on empire building, I'm really glad that your question, I'm really glad that you've raised that, because I think, if I'm being honest, I think there has been some unfortunate language from elected representatives in neighbouring authorities. I think it's the sort of easiest thing in the world to try and paint that sort of picture when government has requested that we all look at options and put forward proposal. That's what we're being asked to do. I think what we're doing is responsible. I think we've put forward actually relatively moderate proposals in the options that we are consulting on. And I think it's also really important to note that no change is not an option. So East Sussex authorities have been consulting on something that would be a new authority, and what's being proposed there as it stands is a unitary authority that would have over 500,000 people. I think there are things that residents in those places need to consider about what that might mean in terms of service delivery, where services are positioned, how close those services actually feel to the towns and the villages that make up that place. So I think it's really important to look at these all as new proposals, essentially, which is what they are. And, I've been clear all along, we want to be as collaborative and as consultative and to try and co-produce ideas as much as we possibly can, albeit in an ambitious timescale.
Thank you. Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still looking. It says the Minister has expressed that unitaries of 300,000 may be considered. I realise I'm going back a bit, but we seem to have gone on an assumption of full steam ahead, but saying that we'll be okay if we reach 300 or just over 1,000 residents. I've been around long enough in the council to realise that every time there's been reorganisation from government down to us, we never get exactly what people want. So I'm just wondering whether we could be overruled on that. The second one was the financial deliverability. I was concerned about that because I was reading in the paper the other week that we're £40 million overspent this year. And yet we're not going to get any transitional funding, and we have to bear those costs locally, it says in the paperwork. So if Angela Rayner is stopping the cap, does that mean our council tax will be increased above 5% to pay for this, as it will have to be paid for? And if we take those areas, we subsume those areas into our remit, do we get their budgets and debts as well? is one question, but it was also about the homeschool transport, adult social care services. They're just two concerns that in more rural areas that we're not used to in places like Kingston, they will be quite expensive, and we will have to foot the bill for those. So following on then, the question is the boundaries. I understand the links with Saltdean and Peacehaven, as that does align with the Kemp Town MP. However, to include Kingston on Newhaven is, to my mind, more about possible land grab. Yes, the NHS do use and go across areas, Newhaven, but that's because we have the teaching hospitals. So everyone in the whole of Sussex, whether you're Worthing area or Kingston area or Newhaven, have to come to Brighton because they're the teaching hospitals and they deliver most of those services there. But is that a good enough reason to annex those areas? I'm really not sure that it is. If just agreeing the MP's area in total for Saltdean and Peacehaven, that seems quite logical. But I do wonder about other areas, particularly those that have a lot of green space that are not in the South Downs National Park. And my last question is, how on earth is anyone supposed to know that this consultation is online on Your Voice? Because I never know how to access it myself, and neither do my residents. Thank you.
Thank you excuse me. Thank you, Councillor Meadows, for your questions, and I hope I addressed them all. Please say if I've not addressed anything. So just to start with, on budget, important to be really clear, we are not £40 million overspent this year. That would be pretty catastrophic given we're only a couple of months into the financial year. And I just want to assure committee members and anyone in the wider public that is watching this, that is not the case. We do have a budget gap for next year. I think that might be what you are referring to because of the extraordinary ongoing increase in demand on our services, particularly in areas such as homelessness and adult social care. So that's obviously something that we're always looking at and seeking to address. I don't know whether Jess might want to add anything on budget, but the idea is that new unitary councils would function in the same way that we do. There would be a certain amount of income that we can raise, and that's part of the analysis we're doing at the moment in understanding the council tax base. We obviously have income from other sources as well, including the government grants. And then referring to Councillor O'Kinn's question in terms of understanding the cost of service delivery in those wards that we're looking at, so that we can work out for ourselves if this is both deliverable, to Councillor Sykes' question, and also sustainable. So that is all being factored into the work that Ignite, our consultants, are doing at the moment. Again, I think it's really important to think about language. There is no proposition to annex anywhere. This is about potentially merging existing wards, so the wards in the city and those to our east. I take your point completely that it's brilliant that we've got a teaching hospital here in the city, and that obviously brings a lot of people in. I think there are lots of other reasons as well why people come in and out of Brighton and Hove. I think Councillor Hewitt referred to it in his presentation, that it's for schools, it's for leisure, it's for work, it's for skills training. So there are all sorts of reasons why you have that flow. I was over in Peacehaven and Telscombe last week, and they don't have any post-16 education offer. So already those young people are moving around and travelling to get their skills and their education. I think actually one thing that's been quite overlooked in the conversation on this issue so far is there is a real opportunity here, if we get this right, to ensure that people have more democracy and governance and oversight over services they may already be using. For example, if you live in East Saltdean, but really you sort of face Brighton and Hove, and you're getting all of your local, most of your local government services are really, or other types of services are coming from the city as it is, you might feel, well, I wouldn't mind having a bit more say over those services and how things are delivered. So I think there is a real opportunity in terms of accountability and democracy as well, if we get this right. I don't know if Jeff wanted to say anything more on budget.
I don't know either. You've probably covered it.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I answer any other questions, Jeff? Yeah. Okay.
And thanks, Sam. Regarding about the Your Voice platform, and it's a very accessible way to access it. I'll be happy to show you if you have a break or at the end of the meeting today. On there, we've, like I say, received close to 500 responses on there already, which is great. With it being live, this is the 6th day. But of course, if the internet's not for everyone, we have a lot of paper copies will be available at the library drop-in sessions, and also at other libraries in the city as well, including in your ward. And with that in mind as well, we've been contacted by the Old Boat Community Centre today to arrange a information session there as well. So I will be in contact with the representative who has made contact with us there. So again, that will really be an opportunity for residents in your ward, if they're not able to access Your Voice platform on the internet, to have that face-to-face at that meeting.
Can I come back? She didn't answer the 300,000. It seems to be our magic number, but we could be overruled and end up, I don't know, subsumed into Lewis, for example.
My apologies, Councillor Meadows. You're absolutely right. I did not answer that question, and it completely went out of my mind. I didn't write it down when you were speaking. So yes, good question. The white paper obviously talked about 500,000. Since then, I think we discussed this a bit at our last committee session. The Minister has been clear. I think he's been clear in the Chamber in Parliament. He's been clear in meetings that he's had with local government representatives, including myself, that is not a hard and fast target that the government is seeking for places to reach. It's a sort of guide in terms of, I think, government's trying to signal to places that they're not going to be interested in proposals that are kind of looking at 100,000, really sort of low figures. They do want to try and achieve some economies of scale. But it's not a hard and fast target. The government's been clear that there's flexibility and it will depend a bit on local circumstances. And it's then really for us to fashion whatever our rationale is as to why we think this would work for our place and for us and neighbours. And I think, let's not lose sight of that point. There's a lot of talk about this being an entirely top-down process, and actually government, I think, is genuinely asking for our recommendations and suggestions and to draw on our local knowledge about what's going to make most sense. But as with any process of local government reorganisation, and I think if you go back through history, it will be the same. And the ultimate decision will be for government when they look at the range of proposals that have come in. If there are proposals that are different or overlapping or whatever, they will be making the final decision after they've done that further statutory consultation that I mentioned, which I think we expect to be between November and January.
Thank you. Next one on my list is Mark.
Thank you. I don't know how many people were involved in 1994 and 97. And Councillor Sankey, you said about time. I think it probably took 10 years after that before people actually recognised Brighton and Hove as opposed to Brighton and Hove separately. So I just think that's just my personal view in the history. From the community voluntary sector, we're agnostic on the options. We can't really say, have a view on it because we've got lots of different groups, but many of our organisations already work across geographical boundaries, and we value the relationships we have outside the city and across the city. And I've got to thank Councillor Gordon for the comments that you made. We have asked our members for views, and what I'm saying now isn't just my view. It's been honed with the staff at Community Works and with reps from other organisations. So I've got to say, this is me being the channel, which is what the role is. So what we would like is more discussion about the risks and benefits, particularly charities. There are some charities and organisations whose defined area of benefit is Brighton Hove City Council borders. So any changes, they're going to have to change what they do. That's not necessarily a bad or a good thing. It's going to be a change for them. We've noted the deep dive you mentioned, which is really welcomed. And obviously, we're very keen to participate in that. And also, I noticed you mentioned about, Councillor Hewitt, about meetings at community centres. And if that's a format that can be sort of replicated, and that's something we'd like to offer, take up an offer to other community groups. And, if it becomes you can drop it into other places, that'd be a really good model to follow with other places. So we're really keen on that. But what we'd like to know is the assessment of the impact on community groups, charities, residents associations, both in our area and any expanded area, because they are going to have to think differently about how they relate. And finally, we're already finding that reorganisation is taking officer time, impacting on partnership working that we're already doing on funding bids, service delivery, and so on, that all our organisations are already working on. Obviously, if that's something that's going to impact in the short term, but can we meet and discuss how that might be addressed, how we might try and look at those sort of grant bids which are going to be put on hold if an organisation doesn't know who it's going to be working with. The funding body might have problems thinking about how they might fund what's going to happen in the future.
No, thanks, Mark. And yes, I remember when Brighton and Hove united. For my sort of forbidden memory, was it the sign to my school change? That was the first one I remember, and everyone commenting that it's now a shade of bottle green as our background for that. No, you fully agree with wanted to meet with the community voluntary sector in sort of as many community settings as possible. But I was just thinking maybe due to the quite limited time which we do have as part of this initial second part of the engagement, might be better suited to having maybe one or two quite larger community-based meetings. Maybe that's something which we could facilitate for that. But of course, once the statutory consultation is underway in the winter, that will also be another opportunity to roll out more events. And to put out there, I'm more than happy to try and attend as many sort of existing meetings which are being arranged from resident groups or community groups between now and the end of the consultation as well.
I'm going to add to that, thank you. And I think it's really important to recognise this is an iterative process. So we're at a really early stage at the moment in terms of that engagement, which will be on our submissions. And obviously, as Councillor Hewitt rightly says, we've then got the government statute. But that engagement will continue throughout this whole period. So right the way through what the decisions made on what the new unitaries look like, then the decisions made around how do we harmonise services. So there's something for me about we will be engaging with residents, our strategic partners, key stakeholders in the voluntary sector, iterating throughout each phase of this, which is going to be really important in terms of that detail that you just spoke about, in terms of how grant funding works for different areas, what the grant funding looks like in the areas that we're talking about merging with at the moment, and how that will work. So that will be ongoing conversations. So we won't have all the answers now, but that will iterate through.
Thanks very much for the questions, Mark. I would just add to what's been said by Councillor Hewitt and by Jess, that we couldn't be more sort of enthusiastic or welcome more the CVS's engagement in this. I've had a few sort of conversations along the way with community and voluntary sector organisations. I think we're all keen to do more of it. So if there are events that you can help facilitate, if there are conversations that you can sort of unlock, please be in touch and, really, really want to kind of put time into that, because I think it's really important. And I particularly highlight how important I think it is to try and hear young people's voices in this. I think it's a sort of perennial issue that much of the stuff that the council consults on, whether it's planning applications or whatever, might have a certain cohort or demographic that predominantly will respond, albeit that many of the decisions we're making, particularly I'd argue in the planning sphere, really are going to have a bigger impact longer term on those younger populations. So really keen to hear from young people and keen to do that engagement in the city, but also in the areas affected. I think that young people living in some of those areas just over our border in Lewis District potentially have quite a lot that might come out of this that could be positive if a merger goes ahead, because I think we have a really positive offer for young people in the city. So I think, trying to generate that conversation and that engagement, I think would be good.
I'll bring Adam in at this point because it seems relevant. So apologies to those I've still got on the list.
Thank you very much. And you do have allies here in terms of engagement with young people and otherwise. And just this week, my own organisation supported 10 young people to be involved in the Elder Place consultation, bringing them face to face with your officers and making sure those voices are heard. Having taken that group out and kind of been around and looked at it all, and so we're really in favour of those processes. I had another question, which was about the discussions around there are technical analysis of key factors that are listed in the paper, and at the end of August you'll have the results from the consultation in the city and be combining those for analysis with neighbouring consultations. Is the point between that and the submission of the option, is there going to be more input from Scrutiny once it's all laid out on the table like that, or is that an executive decision to take, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Do you want me to come? Oh, you go.
Okay. Well, I was just going to confirm that it is an executive decision in terms of the legal framework for making the decision, and also so that would be made by Cabinet, but then there's local choice in terms of how we reach out and engage and share the proposals. So there will be a full report. Obviously, you've described the timeline and it's relatively tight. So the work that our colleagues are doing in relation to doing that analysis that you described will need to take place in that period between end of August and a Cabinet meeting on the 25th of September. But we will have the opportunity, once we have that information, we can take every opportunity we like to share it in ways that it makes sure it reaches the right people.
We've already planned into our thinking because of the tight timeline. We've got the Cabinet on the 25th, but we've also planned in having an all-councillor briefing so that we can share that information and people can ask questions before it gets to Cabinet. And so, other ideas around how we do that with that time framework. We want to give people as much opportunity as possible to ask questions on it so we absolutely get it right.
Thank you. Gary, the next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair of the Brighton and Hove Council's Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I'd like to ask a few questions focusing on the health implications of the proposed LGR, aimed at ensuring that local health services are protected and improved. So my first question relates to the relationship between local and regional government, if you like, balancing local autonomy and regional oversight. How will the LGR affect the relationship between local councils and regional authorities in healthcare? Will there be a clear system to ensure that local priorities continue to shape health service delivery? And in particular, what steps will be taken to ensure that Brighton and Hove's specific needs are not overshadowed by regional considerations as governance structures evolve? The second question relates to scrutiny and oversight and asks what assurances can be given that the ability of scrutiny committees that we particularly have at the minute in health, for example, to hold services to account will not be weakened as a result of LGR. And finally, my last question relates to cross-boundary collaboration on health issues. If LGR involves significant changes to local government structures or geographic boundaries, how will health services manage cross-boundary cooperation in areas like urgent care, mental health services, and community health provision? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. Some really excellent questions there. So to your first question, I think around the kind of regional mechanisms and the local mechanisms on health delivery and health oversight, I think that speaks probably both to the devolution process and the local government reorganisation process. So I'm really pleased to see that in the sort of blueprint for devolution that's in the bill and the government's kind of vision for it, they are clear that health inequalities is something that needs to be built into the remit of the strategic authority and the new mayor. And I think that's absolutely key and really important. I don't think historically there has been enough focus on health inequalities from a sort of governance and service delivery perspective. And so I'm really pleased to see that there. In terms of local government reorganisation, I think your points around ensuring that health services and needs are sufficiently kind of localised and local in their nature and responsive to what we know are quite different health needs that exist in the sort of city and in our immediate area to, in potentially much more rural areas, for example, further away from the city. To my mind, that speaks to the kind of approach that we're trying to take to say we actually think that this region is so diverse, we need to look at maybe slightly smaller unitary authorities than that 500,000 target to ensure that they really do reflect the identity, the sort of challenges that each population faces, and so that they can keep that level of responsiveness as we move away from the sort of two-tier area. I think, this particular proposal on LGR, again, as we've said, I think is pretty moderate. So I don't think even if you took kind of option 4 that you'd say, suddenly there's a very different health profile. I think actually there's much of it that's still quite in keeping given the closeness of those places. So I think that's an advantage of what we're putting forward. On your point about the role of your committee, HOSC, and for example the Health and Wellbeing Board, government's obviously recently issued its 10-year plan, and that's something I've been engaging with ministers on. And it's very clear to me that the vision that government is really trying to set out is to say that they want much more engagement and partnership working between what will be new unitary authorities and health services, and more of a genuine partnership than I think has always been the case in the past. And that's something that I think local government leaders are currently probing government on. I think that government is really clear about the direction of travel, ensuring that our committees within unitary authorities are empowered to both work with the health service and help to fashion health programmes, but then also hold the health service to account appropriately. I know that we are planning as an authority to put in an application for one of the pilot neighbourhood health programmes, and I think we're really well positioned to do that. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to kind of test the government's vision in this space.
Thanks. And just coming in with a sort of quite a broader point about scrutiny in the bill, it's said that all the new unitary authorities will be a cabinet and scrutiny model, so they wouldn't be the committee. So they will, so HOSC and other such scrutinies will still play a major established part in those new unitary authorities going forward.
I'm sorry, I'd just come back because there was another point about cross-border collaboration. And I suppose what I would say to that, Councillor Wilkinson, is that it's been a sort of constant surprise to me how under our existing system, I would say there is relatively little by way of formal mechanism that requires cross-border collaboration, whether that's about health or quite frankly about anything. And I think that is something that devolution is certainly seeking to fix. So at present, there is nothing that really requires me to collaborate and have conversations around health with our immediate neighbours, whether that's the leader of Ada or the leader of Lewis or the leader of West Sussex or the leader of East Sussex. It all happens on a pretty informal ad hoc basis. And I think the new strategic authority will really assist, I think, building those relationships across the region and then ensuring that we can be having the conversations that we might need to on any cross-border issue.
Thank you. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if it's significant that with the Health Watch going and move nearer and nearer to the exit. I don't know whether to read anything into that. I just want to ask a couple of questions about Health Watch and also to let you know that Health Watch has been working with neighbouring Health Watches for years, 13 years. But the Secretary of State has decided it wants to abandon independent scrutiny of health and social care, which is currently delivered by this Health Watch Brighton and Hove. So under the reorganisation, I wonder how that function, which is meant to be coming partly in-house into local government and the Integrated Care Board, how that's going to be financed, and whether you've had any indication whether the independent element that is provided by Health Watch is going to be retained. I don't know. All we've had is an announcement in the Daily Mail. That's where people were given their redundancy notice.
Thanks very much for the question, Jeffrey. And I'm sure the seating has absolutely nothing to do with, with the announcement. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm very happy to go away and to find out and to write to you. Okay.
Sorry, for just a follow-up. In the meantime, we've only been reappointed within months. So we have a core contract. We have no certainty of how long people who are employed by Health Watch will have a job. So motivating them to carry on and deliver the core contract is extremely difficult. And no certainty when the change will happen and whether it's going to be coordinated with this structural change we're talking about, because it needs an act of Parliament to change Health Watch and the arrangements. So when you're writing to the Secretary of State, maybe you can consider that.
Yes, thank you for the information, and definitely we'll try and find out as much as I can.
Thank you. Bridget, Councillor Fisher.
I've got a few questions, if you don't mind. Did you consider another option, which is just expanding a little bit, i.e. just to Falmer and East 14? That's my first question. And then my second question is, why do you think that this council will be more efficient and improve services if it's serving, say, 320,000 people instead of 280? And then following on from that, you keep talking about improved services. So what services do you think need improving in our city and also in those areas that are in the expansion models? And I've got another question, but I'll come back to that after.
Thank you, Councillor Fishley. Direct answer to your question, it wouldn't be possible for us to do a model with just East Saltdean and just Falmer Village, as we've been clearly directed from MHCLG that we need to use whole wards as the building blocks for that. So East Saltdean does include Telscombe, Cliffs in there. Obviously, we have discussed previously, there is an anomaly with how East Saltdean is split in two authorities for that, but that is the reason why we can't just bring in the East Saltdean part, and likewise with Falmer Village, as that's part of Kingston ward.
Thanks, Councillor Fishley, for the questions. In terms of making council services and delivery more efficient. I think there are just clear economies of scale that come from serving a larger population in terms of the cost of delivering, and that will be, to a greater or lesser extent in different services, and that's going to be part of the analysis that we're doing in sort of understanding where those efficiencies might be. In terms of services that need improving, I would say, it's really important that we're not complacent about any of our services in this council. Our children's services have recently been ranked outstanding, but that doesn't mean that we sort of rest on our laurels and stop driving for improvements. And I think that's a really important thing to hold in mind. It's about outcomes, isn't it? And while our children's services might be ranked outstanding, we still know that outcomes, for example, for children in care and for care leavers, do not have parity with those outcomes for children who are not in care and not care leavers. So in everything that we do, there is always room for improvement, and we need to be, I think, as outcome focused rather than service delivery focused as possible. I mean, I think it probably won't surprise you to say an area where we've got real focus on service improvement at the moment is our waste and recycling and garden waste service. And it's already, I think, quite widely known of various range of improvements that we are making. Those improvements are very much live and ongoing in terms of the rollout of in-cab technology. I was actually just viewing a food waste caddy earlier today, which we now have in our possession, or at least we have some sort of prototype that I was able to see. So lots of kind of very live improvements happening in that service. I think it's also no secret that as a local Labour Party, a big part of our manifesto at the last local elections was all around look and feel of the city. And there's, a whole range of things come into that in terms of the public realm, in terms of street cleansing, and that's very much where I think we've still got our attention and our focus. Also improvements we're making in terms of housing and housing repairs. I'd particularly pull out, we had inherited a huge backlog in terms of housing repairs, and we've really worked to get on top of that and are really seeing the improvements and hearing that from residents as well, which is great. So yeah, I don't think we're complacent in terms of any of our services. There is always room for improvement.
So just turning to Peacehaven and Telscombe, and I'm sure you know that the roads off the coast road are kind of yellow concrete, and it will cost tens and tens of millions to bring them up to a decent standard. And then also the issue in New Haven is we need a new bridge. By the time the local government is organised, has been reorganised, we'll have a mayor in place. So will it be the mayor who makes those kind of investment decisions? And do you think the mayor would be able to make those decisions before the new council launches and goes live, so that if you know that you're an expanded council, you know that you've got £80 million in the bank to make these improvements straight away?
Thanks, Bridget. Sorry, Councillor Fishley. Really important question. So certainly on roads, I think that's a subject that the MP, Chris Ward, in Kemp Town and Peacehaven is kind of very active in raising with the government at the moment in terms of that coast road. And I think two things. Yes. Understood. I was recently in Peacehaven, and lots of unadopted roads, lots of work that would need to be done. Absolutely. I'd probably say two things. So in my capacity as chair of the Greater Brighton Economic Board, we recently commissioned a study on economic opportunities within the whole region of Brighton and Hove and Sussex, so the whole devolution footprint. And the idea of that, in part, is to identify potential quick wins, then some of the maybe more medium and longer term kind of infrastructure projects that would really help unlock growth. I imagine a big part of that will be transport connectivity, naturally, whether that's our ports, our airport, our roads, our rail services. So really look forward to kind of seeing the results of that and seeing how that might play in, because I'm acutely conscious that we don't want to go through all of this process, elect a mayor, set up a strategic authority next May, and then everyone's kind of scratching their heads and saying, well, what do we do now? And there's nothing sort of ready to start pushing on. So I'm keen to kind of get all of that underway as soon as possible. And then in terms of, so yes, the strategic authority and the mayor, as I understand it, will have quite a significant responsibility for travel and transport infrastructure. So I think those kind of big projects that you're talking about would certainly be something that the mayor would and the strategic authority would be leading on, obviously in collaboration with the what will be unitary authorities eventually, to input, and to feed into the strategic authority what our real needs are, what our priorities are, what our residents' priorities are. But I think the real benefit of us having a strategic authority and a mayor is that potential relationship with government, the leverage and the ability to receive more investment to help sort out some of our big infrastructure challenges. So yeah, that is absolutely where that would sit.
Thanks. And just following on before that, so you're correct that the mayoral authority will be established before any of the new unitaries, but before it becomes what was known as the mayoral strategic authority. Before that, it will be called a mayoral combined county authority. So the representatives from us here in Brighton and Hove and the upper tiers in East and West Sussex county councils will be sitting on that forum with the elected mayors. So like large infrastructure and transport projects which require that strategic overview, such as, like you say, a new bridge in Newhaven. That's the sort of work which can be started before the new unitary authorities become fully set up in May 28.
And it's just worth saying that on the new unitary authorities, they're 12 months in advance of those, there'll be the shadow unitary authority set up, the political bodies overseeing them, in order to prepare for the vesting day in that 2028.
Thank you. And finally, Maureen. Actually, not finally, because I've got some questions too, but Maureen.
Thank you. I wanted to put forward the possibility that some people might feel left behind. This is a massive project, and there'll be a lot of elements to it that need to be brought together. And some people will feel that there's so much else going on as well in their lives, including those people who are being moved out of the blocks of flats and relocated, and all that kind of thing will be going on at the same time. So how will we look after those diverse and vulnerable communities? And how will we ensure that they recognise that there's an identity that they can belong to as well? And what's that vision that will draw everyone together, and that sense of belonging, which we need to retain while all this is going on? Because some of it will be administrative, and of course, there are so many positives about this, but there will be some people who just might feel left behind. And should we anticipate that and look at what we might put in place? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Windsor. I think that's a really important question. And I think the way you've sort of phrased it and explained it is excellent. I think that, to my mind, one of the most important things that devolution can do, and the reason I'm so positive about it, is I think it provides an opportunity that only comes along sort of once in a generation, potentially, to really genuinely try and transform and improve things for communities that have historically been left behind. That's certainly how I've seen devolution work in places like Greater Manchester, how it's now starting to be rolled out in Bradford. And, we talked about the focus on health inequalities and, those really practical and pragmatic changes that can actually unlock opportunity that I think in areas that have not yet devolved, we have too many barriers to doing that, whether it's the two-tier system or whether it's, not taking a strategic view about bus travel. So you're not providing the routes that allow kids in more deprived communities to try and get to the courses or the skills training or the vocational opportunities that could really serve them. Whether it's about making that more affordable, I would love to see that be free for young people right across Brighton and Hove and Sussex. Like that, those are the potential opportunities, and that's the direction I would love us to take this project. So I think we've got a real role to try and explain that, because I think it's so easy for devolution and local government reorganisation. Just the words sound incredibly technocratic. They can sound pretty managerial. It can sound really distant and very abstract. So I think we all have a role to play in trying to bring that alive and to engage communities in that process. And, I think we need to think through how best we do that. There are kind of, I think, ad hoc attempts at that going on. John talks about a meeting that a community group has approached us about. We're trying to make ourselves as available to speak to different communities as we possibly can. But I'd really welcome thoughts that this committee might have on maybe a more structured approach to engaging our residents and also residents in neighbouring areas. Once we have a clearer idea of what proposal will be taken forward, I think there's a big job to do in terms of sort of building the identity of the new place and ensuring that people feel that connection and don't feel that their existing community identity is being threatened or challenged. So I think there's a lot of work to do, but I don't sort of pretend to have all of the answers on that. So I'd really welcome people's expertise and insight and recommendations on how we best do it.
I'd like to just follow on though, so thanks. That was a very good question there. And, everyone in this room probably is guilty at times of being in a bit of a political bubble. And, the reorganisation of a local authority or local authorities is on the last thing on a lot of people's minds with all which is going on at times in their lives. But I think that's one of the reasons why we're such advocates of having 5 unitary authorities or 5 smaller ones within the Sussex footprint, as we feel that will help sort of encompass those communities within it, and they'll feel closer to the not only the decision making, but with engaging with their local authority and the representatives on it.
We come in on that point around the communities, because I think it's really important that we, as we work through this, and just building on what Bella said about absolutely wanting to engage, we've got to think about communities are communities of place at all sorts of different scales, and people feel connected at all sorts of different scales. And what local government reorganisation and what devolution doesn't do is take away people's local connection to place, whether that's place in terms of their street, whether it's place in terms of their neighbours, whether it's place in terms of their ward, and the ward boundaries that so many of you represent are really important. And there's also communities of interest that we absolutely have hundreds of across the city, whether it's sporting interests, whether it's libraries interests, or whatever those are, and we've got to recognise those as well. And then as we move up to that, to the strategic authority, how do we hear the voices from those different communities, but think strategically across the whole about meeting the needs of those strategic authorities? And that's really important, that people feel a connection, but they also feel their local interests in their place and their communities of place and their communities of interest is really heard and understood. And that's what we'll try and hold as we work through this.
Maureen, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just another quick question, which is, will we need that expertise brought in, community engagement staff, for example, to help with that process? Because it might need some expertise in this kind of large project approach, and to avoid those people being left somewhere in a corner and they don't feel part of it. Thanks.
Yeah, no, definitely. And our community engagement teams are already playing a part. They've really helped coordinate the library drop-in sessions which we're hosting, and we've already made sort of some preliminary discussions with them about what we'll be doing after this sort of second phase of engagement between us making our submission and the government statutory consultation, and then beyond.
Thank you. I've got Jeffrey and Councillor Goddard again.
I mean, I congratulate you on conducting a consultation when we're just coming up to peak holiday season. So good luck with that. But I just wonder what sort of benchmarking you will make in your decision making. I mean, you said you had 433 responses in 6 days. I noticed that change.org, which is campaigning against the takeover of Lewes by Brighton, has got 4,300 or 4,000 something, I can tell you now, over 4,000 in 6 days. So will you be taking notice of other polls like that? Or are those completely off the wall and not scientific? Answers on a postcard, please.
I think probably the best way of answering that is to say, as Councillor Hewitt referred to earlier, that we understand that Lewes District and East Sussex County Council are running a consultation for their residents on our proposals. They've sort of mirrored them and asked for views. And we've been in touch with Lewes District Council and said we'd be really keen to see your raw data to try and understand, what you're hearing back from your residents, particularly those impacted by our proposals. So that is certainly information that will be taken into account, both our own consultation responses and also the sort of qualitative data that we gather by speaking to partners and speaking to elected representatives. I was pleased to be in New Haven yesterday speaking to their town councillors. You had some really interesting perspectives on both, understandable kind of concerns and fears that residents might have just kind of hearing about these proposals for the first time, but also the ways in which I think, I was receiving really clear feedback that there are communities there that feel they've been left behind, not particularly brilliantly served by the two-tier system, and are interested to explore what kind of opportunities might be possible by thinking about the proposals that we've put forward.
Just to say, change.org is always framed in a way to get the answer. The people framing the questions pop them in. So you're bound to get a particular answer.
I don't disagree with that analysis. And I'd also say, it's important that what we've sought to do with the consultation, with the Your Voice consultation we've put out, is to ensure that we can understand who we're hearing from. So we've, segmented it so that we understand if it's a resident in Brighton and Hove, if it's someone in an affected area. I'm not sure that change.org would have as much nuance in their data collection. So difficult to really analyse and understand who those people were that were responding.
And it could also be argued that doing a survey at this time of year is actually better. People are starting to wind down a bit. There's an opportunity for them to engage with this. It's quick and easy to do, either on Your Voice or on the paper form. And you've got to remember, despite it being the summer, not every resident's jetting away for 4 to 5 weeks over this period. So I'd say it's still accessible, and even if they had jetted away somewhere, they could still access it online.
It's worth just saying on our Your Voice platform, it prevents things like bots or trolls being able to respond in the same way, but they unfortunately can on change.org. So we would need to filter data for that.
And can I just say that people being whipped up on social media by the MP for Lewes and the head of Lewes District Council using inflammatory, irresponsible language. I don't think that change.org petition really indicates anything, because it takes 10 seconds to sign that kind of petition, whereas to actually register it on Your Voice and go through the whole process requires a bit more effort. And then what's the other one thing I want to say? Oh, I want to say, well, I have a friend on New Haven Town Council, and to start with, she said the way they found out was horrendous, you know, by this announcement by Lewis, and they were all quite flummoxed and upset. But now they've met Bella and had kind of it explained to them a little bit more, and it's not a done deal. They feel much more comfortable. So I'm hoping that over the next few weeks, that will kind of trickle out to Peacehaven and Telscombe.
Yes, here. I completely agree with that. There's been a lot of misinformation. Councillor Goddard.
Sorry, Chair, could I just also add something to that? Sorry, Councillor Goddard, because it's a really important point, actually, and I have quite deliberately not sought to particularly respond publicly or sort of up the ante, because I think it's important our residents don't think this is just something that local councils are fighting over. And I think there's a responsibility on all elected members to conduct themselves responsibly in this process. But I have just had a look at that petition, and quite frankly, it's sort of in the way that the petition has been worded is in the realms of conspiracy theory. It's not accurate and it's not factual, the sort of premise of that petition. So I'm afraid to say it really does count for nothing, because if you intentionally mislead people and then ask them to sign something, that's not reliable data and evidence.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Goddard.
Just a quick one. I think not only is there a possibility of delivering integrated services, greater investment for Sussex-wide initiatives, but also there's a possibility of doing politics differently. And I echo Councillor Fishley's worries about some of the language that's come from our friends in Lewis. I'm listening to a fantastic podcast called Sussex and the City from an organisation called Always Possible. And right at the heart of one of the episodes is identity around Sussex and identity and culture. So I think Maureen Council-Winder is absolutely spot on when she talks about those people who might not, just to quote her, an identity that they can belong to. And that's going to be absolutely crucial as we develop Sussex in the future. Chief Executive's comments on the importance of place-based is absolutely relevant, right from the street, right through to the region. There's so much that connects us together as people who live in this place that we've got to focus on it. But also, you have to accept, dear Chief Executive, that some of the silos within which we organise ourselves actually undermine placemaking, undermine identity, and undermine the culture of communities. And I can give you multiple examples of that across East Brighton, Hove, etc., etc. It's how we organise that we have the power to change ourselves. And I think that's important to look at.
Yeah. Okay, I think I have Mark next.
So we discussed at some point previously the mention in the bill of neighbourhood committees. I've just got an article here from LGC in 16th of June, why Jim McMahon is backing area committees. And he's talking, he went further in what he said and said he's looking at neighbourhood area committees led by ward councillors. So that's something the minister himself is actually thinking of. I haven't heard any, and that's irrespective of where the boundaries change or what happens. So it'd be really interesting to know about what you're thinking and what your thinking is about taking that forward. Because where the parish councils were, Bridget, is in Rottingdean, you've got parish councils, you've got that structure. Years ago, we tried to get a parish council for Hanover. And at the time, God knows, probably 25 years ago, and at the time, the city council had a veto over parish councils, urban parish councils being established, and said, we don't want it. So it never happened. But, you know, that would be the same sort of idea. Parish council in a city centre would have had a levying capacity. So neighbourhood committees really do exactly what Councillor Goddard was saying, gives the ability to have, I don't know what they would be called. They wouldn't be town councillors, parish councillors, neighbourhood area board reps like that. and it would give that locality-based discussion some place to focus on in a formal, structured way. But it's the same as a parish council. It's a sort of parish council idea. They're called in the bill or in the white paper. They're called. Well, they're called neighbourhood. The minister called them neighbourhood area committees. So I'm using the minister's term. Okay, so that's what he's talking about.
Thanks, Mark, for the question. I think that from my understanding of the sort of minister's position and the sort of direction of travel here, I think the government is really keen to ensure that communities are empowered and can organise themselves effectively. I think the government's also really keen to ensure that there isn't any sort of mandate or a kind of grassroots local layer of governance isn't kind of forced in a sort of tick box way on communities, and really acknowledging that this kind of system always works better when it's from the bottom up, when it's people organising and saying this is something that we want to do. We think we need more of a sort of place-based way of governing in these local communities, and we'd like to take on responsibility for something, or whatever it might be, whatever the purpose of it might be. So yeah, in my discussions with the minister, he's been really clear that I think when they started to do the analysis and to see how different things look at that level right across the country, even within our own city, right, but certainly as you move around the country, that they didn't want this layer of it to be at all top down. So let's see what already exists, what might work well, and if there is an appetite for other ways of organising, then to be open to that. And I think that's kind of where we're at as well. But I think Jess wants to come in too.
I just wanted to come in just to add to that, really, that government haven't outlined any detail in the devolution and community engagement bill. They want to really think about that, and we're really keen to work with them. Bella mentioned the word co-produce earlier. We would really love to co-produce with our communities and any area that we merge with for that new authority to think about actually what does that neighbourhood governance look best like for us. How does that speak to parish and town councils? How does that speak to our neighbourhood planning forums where we have them already? How does it speak to the existing structures and what would work for us? And really co-producing that by area is really important. I was going to mention my experience from working in Wiltshire. And I was there during the pandemic, and they have it's unitary authority, a population of 500,000. They've got 250 different parishes and towns, but they also have a system of community area boards, which interlink with the parish and town councils, which are chaired by the ward councillors, and which have delegated authority on decision making, so they're formal decision making bodies, and they have delegated community grants, which they are grant programme for, which works really well, but that's a very large rural authority. And what we need to think about is what will work really well for our communities and our areas. And we're starting, our thinking already around our SEAL grant and how that's used is starting to think in that space. But we need it to really work for all of our different places across the city.
I think that the Siltboard idea is certainly something I've mentioned to others. I mean, you're blessed by having two former chairs of Queen's Park LAT in the room, Jeffrey over there and myself. And LATs, some places have LATs and some don't. What we've ended up with historically, for no design, but we've ended up with a patchwork of different sorts of local area representation across the city. And some areas got a LAT, some areas have community forums, some areas have residents' associations, and while that, yes, that reflects locality issues, it's also really difficult to navigate. And some areas have nothing, and it's something that is a bit more consistent. At least the option to be more consistent might be quite good. I'm not suggesting you define them now, obviously, but it'd be just good to have some in the mix.
I'm very conscious of Councillor Gollard's comments earlier that it's the silos that we create and the boundaries that we put up that can create the issues with our community. So I think there's something really important about the term that Bella used earlier about co-producing, doing this with our community is so critical.
Great.
Thank you. Councillor Fowler.
So I've just really got a comment, and it's going back to the petition and what Councillor Fishy said. So I've got family that live in Peacehaven and Telscombe, and I think initially they come to me that they were really worried about the whole situation because they had visions of tower blocks and just more council tax. But after I've spoken to them, I think all they're really interested in is their council tax going to be the same as ours, and it's just not going to be more than what they are, that their bins are going to get emptied. And I think, and also, they do have lack of leisure facilities like swimming pool. Peacehaven doesn't have a large supermarket. I think Morrison's has been taking its time. I'm not even sure whether they've pulled out or not. And also, following the Peacehaven gossip, sometimes the road in and out of Newhaven is like really awful, and people don't even want to go to Newhaven because of, there's some lovely garden centres, and I myself sometimes think, oh mum, I don't want to go to that one. I can't remember, Paradise Park. The traffic getting out of there or in there is awful. I've been in traffic for ages, and I think people just want things like that to be settled and to be guaranteed that these things will be happening.
Help dinosaurs too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Fowler, for the question and the insight. And I think, there's so much about your question that really encapsulates what it is we're trying to do and trying to achieve. The fact you have family members that live out in Peacehaven and Telscombe, I think, just speaks to actually we're not these two divided communities that have no links. There are so many links between us. Growing up, I had good friends in Peacehaven. There is already, I think, such a kind of shared sense of place and identity and belonging, but it's important to kind of identify that, I think, because there are clearly voices that have been doing the opposite. And it's good to hear that I think some of those initial fears, and probably more to do with the way that the information was leaked rather than properly published, might have caused some of those fears. So really good to hear that I think there's been some progress on that. And, these are all completely valid questions. It happens to be at the moment that if you live in Lewes District in East Sussex County Council in that area, you pay, I think, some of the highest council tax of anywhere in our region. Whereas in Brighton and Hove, our council tax relative to theirs is several £100s a year lower. I think to your points around, the supermarket. The fact that Peacehaven doesn't currently have a supermarket, I think, is an absolute crying shame. There is a long history to that, but it needs to be resolved. And I think you need sort of dynamic local government intervention, if necessary, to ensure that that is resolved and that a chain like Morrison's isn't able to effectively sit there on the land but not activate it. That community needs services and needs support. So, I think my message to residents there would be that in kind of conducting this consultation and in trying to get into this engagement exercise, the more we can understand the particular challenges that they face, the more we can be informed and think about, if this proposal were to go ahead, how would we make that work better or this work better? I think the point you make about the coast road and the congestion is something I hear about all of the time. That would be, I'd say, one of the main bits of feedback that I've had so far in this process, but previous to that as well, in terms of some of our residents, in terms of that congestion and how that transport infrastructure clearly is not currently doing the best job it could for connecting residents and meaning that they are able to get about in an efficient way and without spending huge amounts of time sat feeling really frustrated in a traffic jam. So those are all things I'd be really keen to look at through the process of LGR and devolution, because I think that's where the opportunities are to unlock it.
Thank you. I did have a few questions myself, but to be honest, they're quite technocratic and dull. Well, they are. And given the turn that the conversation took after Councillor Winder's inspiring question, I think I'm just going to write them down in an email and not ask them. So thank you very much. I think we're done on LGR, and I'm going to call a comfort break for 10 minutes, if that's okay with everyone, before we come back and hear the update on the DEVA conversation. Thank you very much. We'll get started. I'm just going to, before we move on to the devolution update, I'm just going to say that what we're being asked to do on the LGR, just to finish that off, is to note the progress update on local government reorganisation, consider the engagement approach and materials, identify any issues or lines of inquiry that need to be considered in the development of Brighton Hove City Council's final proposal to government. Are we happy to note the report, and do we feel we've done all of that? Thank you. Okay, so we will move on to the devolution update. Councillor Hewitt, would you like to present your slides?
Hello again. If we can,
He's back.
if we can move on to the first slide, please. Thank you there. In this part of the meeting on this item, I'm going to be presenting an update on devolution to you all. And as part of this report, we're going to hear about the government's response to the consultation. We're going to dive into a bit more detail about the English devolution and community empowerment bill, and we'll cover our proposal for the establishment of an informal partnership board and what the next steps are. Moving to the next slide. So starting off with this slide, it's a quote from Jim McMahon, who's the Minister for State for Local Government and English devolution, and just really putting it out there just to highlight and to get there that we've done very well in Sussex and Brighton for our proposal to be part of the priority programme has been accepted. The submission has met the tests which the government had set, and when they followed that on with their consultation and just really just to drive home as well about what this is going to mean for our region, that this is going to give powers to our local leaders and those of us with local knowledge to drive economic growth and empower our communities, so to invest to support with the work. As members, there's a link to the full statement as well there, should you wish to read any further into that. If we move on to the next slide, thank you. So just before this announcement was made that we are going to be on the priority programme, there was an announcement that the bill itself was published, and this underpins any devolution deals within the sort of terms of those bills, as opposed to being conducted on a deal by deal basis, is what had currently existed. The bill covers many areas we've touched on earlier today, local government structures, but also has changes to the role of the mayor and voting and the devolution structures, which we'll cover there. But also there's strong focus, as mentioned earlier with Mark, about how communities and mayor groups are going to be recognised as part of this going forward. With the next slide, please. This is what slide which presented at the last Scrutiny committee in June on there. So where we're saying that Sussex and Brighton, we're being established as a mayoral strategic authority, which does allow for the potential to evolve into an established mayoral authority, which will have even greater devolved powers from government on there. And we'll go into sort of further details from what this means in practice later on in the presentation. The next slide, please. So with the release of the bill, we've been able to gather a lot more details from there, sort of around the functions of the mayor and voting within there. So I'll quickly run down the areas we've highlighted. So you see that the term power of competence is used. That's the phrase which is being used within the bill for the powers and duties which the mayor and the strategic authority have, sort of interchangeable with areas of competence. So the mayor has the ability to appoint up to 7 commissioners to lead on specified areas of competence. In there, the commissioners won't be voting members of the mayoral strategic authority, but I say they can be brought in to lead on both an area each within the remit of the strategic authority. It's confirmed that MPs are unable to hold the role of mayor, similar to when MPs, for example, couldn't also hold office in the European Parliament, for example. So it's that same process. It's really been set up that it's going to be quite a strong authority. The mayor has the powers to convene and ask partners to respond to their requests and call in support to ensure that neighbouring authorities are collaborative. So it's similar to the sort of levels of powers which are held in Parliament, where there's parliamentarians have the ability to call in outside bodies to respond to them. Remuneration of the constituent members will be a very similar process to what we have here in Brighton Hove City Council, where an outside independent body would make recommendations. The budget will need to be voted on and passed by a simple majority of members, which includes the mayor. And there is the ability for a mayoral precept to be implemented as well. An example of that which has been used in Greater Manchester was the mayoral precept was used to challenge housing inequalities and try and resolve the issues with homelessness and rough sleepers. The voting system, so it's been established that the round of elections taking place in May 26, which we're part of, is going to be on a first past the post basis, but from elections from 2027 onwards, so the second election, which we'll have on our mayoral strategic authority, will be on a supplementary vote system. If you move on to the next slide, please. So I won't go into great detail. This is the slide which you had at the last scrutiny committee, which covers the 7 devolved areas which the mayoral strategic authority will have from central government. And over the next few slides, we're going to each one of the 7 in a bit of a further detail. So we start as which on the next slide is transport and local infrastructure. So one of the main sort of headlines, and I won't go into each of these areas in any great detail as I'm presenting, but just sort of a highlight from this is that an establishment of a local transport authority will be set up, which will oversee the network for the whole region. Again, like I said, I won't go into great detail of each one, but of course happy to go back when we move to members' questions. The second slide, thank you, is skills and employability. As you'll see, there's very strong focus on the flexibilities which will be able to be offered for adult further learning. Apprenticeships, as they are, will remain on the, they won't be devolved, they'll remain on the national apprenticeship levy based framework for that, but it's, has the ability to allow adults in our region to access those. The next slide, please, is a focus on the housing and strategic planning across this authority. So there's quite a sort of emphasis on the planning overviews, which obviously at the moment we're using a national plan and policy framework to be creating a more local one which will be more tailored for the communities in Sussex. And there's a real overarching focus as well on this is about creating the infrastructure for the building and the targets which local authorities will have for their areas. The next slide, please, is on the creation of so I've just caught up. Yeah, I think our slides are a bit jumbled up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, sorry. I thought. No, thank you. So we've got economic development and regeneration. So this is going to be one of the real marquee points coming from this Mayoral Strategic Authority, and I sort of envisage it will be one of the first which will actually be enacted is the creation of local growth plans. Now that's something which has really been sort of worked on quite a lot already. So having this, it will really give us the opportunity now to enact what can be built out of that. Then we have the next slide, please, on environment and net zero. As you'll see, there's not actually many devolved powers coming down from government in this aspect, but it does really give a focus on being able to allow us to coordinate on a large scale, having a joined up approach. So for example, you could think of the opportunities for the wind and solar farms, which can be implemented in such a large area in Sussex. The next slide is focusing on health and wellbeing services, and as we touched on earlier, something which our administration has really have sort of focused on is ensuring that health inequalities are challenged and ensuring that health outcomes are key delivery of any of the services we provide. At this time as well, I'd like to say that the chair of the Integrated Care Board will be invited to be part of our informal partnership board, and we would expect them to be a key partner of the Mayoral Strategic Authority as well. The next slide, please, is the final one on the devolved powers is public safety. So as you all know, the Police and Crime Commissioner office and role is being abolished, and those responsibilities will be held by a deputy within the strategic authority that will be appointed by the mayor. Also that, which will be impressed to our chair here, that the fire service authorities will also be coming under the remit of the Mayoral Strategic Authority. And as we have, obviously, the East and West Fire and Rescue Service Authorities are separate bodies, that will allow an opportunity for them to merge under that one umbrella. And the final slide, please, is our next steps to take. So to establish an informal partnership board, we fully recognise it's critical and important to work very collaboratively with colleagues in East and West county councils, and we'll be working with them and other key parties and stakeholders, including the district and boroughs, which will have a representative on our partnership board. But pleased to announce that we've made an appointment, or there has been an appointment made for an interim devolution programme director for Sussex. They'll effectively be acting as the interim chief executive of that authority, and we've also appointed an internal Brighton Hove programme lead, so it can really drive home that on behalf of our authority on that. We're going to be creating a draft constitution and assurance framework, so that could be adopted on day one of the strategic authority being created. So that would be quite vital. So the office will be able to get off to a running start with that. A funding announcement will be made in the autumn, and as a result of that, we're going to be tabling a full council where all councillors can debate that financial announcement, and that will feed into a subsequent cabinet meeting, as cabinet is the executive function to approve that. So that full council will be a real opportunity for all members to contribute and feed into that before it goes to cabinet. And just to finally highlight that it needs the agreement of all three constitute authorities, which is us, East and West Sussex County Councils, before the mayoral strategic authority can be established, which will then be with an immediate effect. Thank you.
Just very briefly to add to, again, a very comprehensive and really informative presentation from Councillor Hewitt. Obviously, since we last met at our other very special meeting with the special presence of Councillor Goddard, we have had, the announcement, the really big news from government, and how exciting and how historic that we've got this opportunity to really, I think, have much greater influence and really be able to shape the fortunes of our region and our residents' lives. I think it's something that we should be really proud of in Brighton and Hove and in Sussex, that government has recognised that we need these powers and believe that we're in the place that we are to receive them and chart a course forward. So I think it's incredibly positive news for the region, and just seeing those powers and responsibilities set out there by Councillor Hewitt, you can really see the potential, can't you? Just with what's in this initial bundle of responsibilities, let alone what I think further future devolution, including potentially greater fiscal devolution, might have to offer.
Thank you. Questions? Ollie?
Thank you, Chair. Just one, and thanks again for the presentation. Very wide-ranging duties, powers, and areas of competence, and that gives rise to a question in my mind about the potential political makeup of the strategic mayoral authority and that of the constituent unitaries. And one can envisage a situation where there may be a difference in the political makeup of those respective bodies. And, given the duties, powers, areas of competence, how do we envisage managing that tension? And is there potential for that to undermine the purpose and effectiveness of devolution as a whole?
No, thanks for the question, and I'm really envisaging it as a great opportunity for more collaborative work in between political groups. Within that, as you quite rightly point out, the makeup could be, you could have a mayor of one political party, and the cabinet of the members on the strategic authority could be a wide range, especially if we were to have 5 unitary authorities making up that authority. You would have that would be 10 plus the mayor. So could be a very wide-ranging scope. I don't feel that it would undermine any decision making. I feel that it will be a real opportunity for all those parties to work collaboratively, working together. They would all want what is best for their region. They've got, have so many great powers devolved down to them to implement, and if it would be a real opportunity to do so. And it has worked in other areas of the country where certainly an example would be where Ben Houchin is. He's a Conservative mayor but works with predominantly Labour members on the authority, and that is an example where it has worked and there's been results for that area which has devolved responsibilities.
Thank you. Teresa, and then Ty, and then Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome the appointment of a new director for the programme for devolution, and I really hope that with his experience that he brings to it, that he can actually support us working with the Mayoral Strategic Authority and its development to improve the tangible outcomes for people in our communities. So that's quite exciting. One question is that with the diversion of the grants that we get from central government to the Strategic Mayoral Authority, what impact is that going to have on us and our finances in Brighton and Hove?
Thanks very much, Councillor Mackin. Completely endorse and agree with what you say about how it's great to see the sort of progress and now the sort of programme starting to come together. In terms of the finances, I think what is potentially sort of positive about this whole project and this whole what we're embarking on here is that I think over time you will see a net increase in the amount of investment that comes in, money that comes in to Brighton and Hove and to the region, both government investment and then also increased private investment. And I think that's certainly the case if you look at somewhere like Greater Manchester, which has had significant increase in government investment and spend in that region, as well as now having the platform to be able to bring in additional private investment. I think that you will see sort of funding moving in both directions, really. So some of the funding we currently get for some of the powers we exercise that are moving into the Strategic Authority will go there. But what you see, I think, across the piece with devolution, and I know our Deputy Leader, Councillor Taylor, was recently in Bradford, is money coming down through the Mayoral Authority into the local authority. So skills training that is being delivered by Bradford City Council has been passported by the Strategic Authority to the council, because let's remember the Strategic Authority is going to be very important for sort of directing strategy, and the governance arrangement set out by Councillor Hewitt explains that with the commissioner role and the convening role, and then the duty to respond, so really able to move things forward, because we know what often happens is paralysis in local government. So that's going to be really their role, but actual kind of implementation, the sort of doing, whether that's the building of the houses or the development of public realm and infrastructure, that is still going to be local authorities. We're not losing those very sort of practical implementation, operational responsibilities. But I think we will have greater investment with which to do those things overall. And then that clearer kind of more joined up strategy, so that we know we're making the right investments, or investments that speak to each other across the unitary boundaries.
Thank you. That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mackie. Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Councillor Hewitt. That was another fantastic presentation, delivered with your usual verve and specialness. I'm interested in the voting system, which seems to have yo-yoed from supplementary to first past the post. Isn't it a shame that the May 26 elections, if those go ahead and everything's passed, that this is going to be on a first past the post basis? Following Councillor Sykes's insight about the politics of the situation, it would suggest to me that supplementary vote has much more of a democratic basis for the kind of authority, both with a capital A and a small a, that is going to be needed by that mayoral person. And is there any way that we can have please supplementary vote rather than first past the post for May 26?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Goddard. And what can I tell you? Last time I appeared before your special committee, I asked for the supplementary vote system, and it turns out I'm a very effective lobbyist, and the government has now agreed to that. So that is fantastic for the reasons that I think we discussed previously, which is that in an area of this size, this number of people, 1.7 million, trying to deliver a voting system that brings about the greatest amount of possible consensus. So not everyone is necessarily getting their first choice, but people are, at least not unhappy with the outcome. I think it's something we should all be striving for. So I'm really pleased that the government has shifted its position. I think that is something to be welcomed. And I, completely echo what you're saying. I think if at all possible, it would be best to kind of get our authorities on the right footing from the get-go, and to try and find a way to have that voting system in place for our mayoral election next May. So, government, if you're listening, please do consider that.
Thank you, Councillor Sankey. I agree. Mark.
Thanks. I'd have to change what I was saying because I just realised the acronym's changed. It's now MSA, not MCA. So I can't use my joke of YMCA. Sorry, very bad joke. Going back to what I was talking about with local government, there's little mention of how community groups, community voluntary sector will feed into the mayoral authority. Now, obviously, it's really early days, and I completely appreciate that. But the powers of competence, they're all very crucial. But there's no real mention in those powers of competence, and obviously they've come from the government, not you, of how community groups will feed into them. And we're just concerned about how the commissioners might work with communities, and indeed how will there be scrutiny panels at an MSA level? We don't know, but it's something to feed back into the process. One area I do want to mention, because you did mention Greater Manchester, but the relationship between the transport powers, I can't speak without mentioning transport sometime. Where there's good faith, like in Manchester, where you've got Andy Burnham doing some really good stuff, and the constituent bodies have been there historically, and they've all worked together, that works really well. But my view is really there's a lot more similarity in this area between somewhere like Cambridge and Peterborough, where it's got a big city and rural areas, and it's a lot more like that. And in that area, I think the conflict that Ollie and Councillor Goddard were talking about, where there's potential for the mayor has a power to set up the strategic network. And if the strategic network is different to what you as a council, future council, want, that's a risk that might end up with a difference of opinion about what should be going forward. And there's stuff on bike share, and the mayor will have powers to license bike share. There's already bike share in the city. So it's things like that might be an issue. And another thing I was asked by environment reps to focus on was, I think what Councillor Hewitt pointed out was that the only thing that's mentioned in there was combined heat zones on environment issues. And there's nothing in there about working at climate change, which this seems to be a really good level to work on climate change issues. Another one, but I think you mentioned earlier, was sea defence. I mean, surely the mayoral competency would have to be for sea defence, given it's across the whole of the mayoral area. So there are things that would seem to be need to be worked on. I'm not saying this is obviously not the final answer, but need to be worked on in the future. Thanks.
And thanks for that. And I think, yeah, to say a lot of the elements of this strategic authority can always evolve with the scope and remits of what it can bring. And yeah, so you are right, we shouldn't always necessarily compare ourselves to Manchester. Obviously, that is always one of the first ones which comes to mind as it's, you know, one of the success stories from the evolution. I think the real sort of power of having this done on a Sussex level is we are going to be able to tailor, you know, Sussex transport for Sussex. It doesn't have to be necessarily replicated on the same level as the more urban Manchester, where you've got, like, say, more established towns around the large city. But it can just be something that's involved in more coordinated network passes and sort of joined up that. So, you know, if you're travelling from Brighton to, you know, West Sussex, etc., on public transport by bus, you know, you need to use two different sort of passes, for example, so this could join up, even just simplifying the payments for it side of it. So I think you make good points on that. On that one, and so just to catch on your first point again about the neighbourhoods, they obviously will have a strong part within the strategic authority about how you know, they're going to be a part of our informal partnership body as well. So we will have input from those groups, you know, from very early on in the process, and we'll ensure that continues with that. I'm not sure if there's anything I missed or needs further input from anyone else.
Thanks, Councillor Hewitt. Yeah, I think that really covered things, and great to hear, Mark, your support for the work that Andy Burnham has done in Greater Manchester, which I think is really significant and genuinely trailblazing. My understanding is that he has really leveraged that work with community and voluntary groups to understand needs, particularly in deprived areas. I think he's done some excellent work on housing and homelessness, and has used his convening powers and then investment powers to make progress. I think, for example, on transport, you know, we already have the Partnership of Transport for the South East that our Cabinet member, Councillor Trevor Mouton, sits on. I know from speaking with him about that there is already, you know, a pretty detailed and collaborative conversation that has gone on around what is needed in terms of transport infrastructure. But you know, up till now, despite the fact there is a business case for various projects and modelling has been done, we haven't had the platform to really engineer that investment that is needed to move things forward. And I think that is the frustration of people that involved with that body. And, you know, you speak to the chair, Councillor Keith Glazier, the leader of East Sussex, and he'll tell you the same thing. So, you know, in other areas, in skills, for example, I know that skills providers in Brighton and Hove and Sussex are already actually quite far ahead in terms of the collaboration they do to ensure that they complement one another rather than compete with each other, and that there is a, you know, the right skills offer available in different places to meet the needs. So there already is, I think, we've already got quite a good story to tell in terms of our ability to organise ourselves and collaborate. But what we've not had is that joined up working with government and government support in moving things forward. So that's what I think this opportunity provides, whether that's like the hard-edged cash to do it, or, you know, that regular forum to be having those discussions in a way that is going to feel like you're leading to meaningful progress rather than it being a talking shop. So I think that's really positive. And then I'll just finally say on climate that you know, I agree. I think the responsibilities and the areas of competence could say more on climate. And I think it's also important to remember that as part of this overarching framework, the government is clear that strategic authorities will in time have the power to request. So that will be the power to request further powers currently exercised by central government. So I think there's definitely, I think government's absolutely right to take the uniform approach to governance and the setting up of these bodies, and to move away from that deals-based approach where I think, you can't then really be certain that things are being funded in a fair way and so on. But what I think government is also open to is that each area will have its particular challenges or particular things that it might need. And so they want to start then having a dialogue about what more we might need to fit our place and to help our place. So I think that's good. And then also on climate, the work that the Greater Brighton Economic Board has done in the last year to establish Sussex Energy, I'm hoping can very much be something that is then taken up by a new strategic mayoral authority, various different incubator projects around collaboration. We're just looking at the solar across Sussex idea. So already, I think, importantly and excitingly, working with all local authorities in our footprint. So even those that aren't in the Greater Brighton Economic Board structure, but for example, East Sussex and West Sussex, officers working collaboratively, thinking about where the opportunities are, recognising we need to have a shared objective to reach energy sustainability and independence by 2040. So, working backwards, how do we get there and how do we work together to get there? So quite a lot of work, I think, on that agenda is already happening at that Sussex-wide level. And there'll be an opportunity with the mayoral authority to lobby for that work to really be accelerated, I think.
Thank you. Jeffrey.
I feel I'm the health for this place. How does this whole reorganisation dovetail with the South Downs National Park and its governance? We're talking about environment. The South Downs National Park serves a population in excess of 100,000. So there are a lot of people living there. How does that work with the new arrangements?
So, a really good question, Jeffrey. And obviously, South Downs National Park is incredibly important, given the size of it within our area and the number of communities that live within it, on the edge of it, access it for health and well-being, and it's real importance to our place. So Councillor Hewitt outlined our plans for an informal partnership board. That's something that will certainly include in some form the South Downs National Park. And so to begin collaborating with them across the existing 3 upper tiers and other partners and stakeholders. And I would absolutely foresee that they would have a role within the strategic authority going forward, but that's obviously a decision that will need to be made and agreed between the partners about what kind of role that is.
Well, and I sat on the one of the ports, I've forgotten which one, but under the new arrangements, we'll suddenly have 2 port authorities in our area. Similar sort of vision for integrating their activities within the mayoral authority.
Yeah. So the informal board is certainly going to have business representatives, and clearly those ports play a huge kind of strategic, significant role in our regional economy. The work that Shoreham Port, I think, is doing is genuinely trailblazing. Work on hydrogen, sustainability, the growth in the port's activity, the cooperative principles that it's based on, which means that all of that is reinvested in the port's activity. I think you've got an absolute exceptional example of what a port can and should be. Obviously supporting so many thriving businesses within their port area as well. I would love to see, and I think that devolution might help us unlock it, more of a strategic Sussex port strategy. We obviously have several ports of different sizes, but I think greater collaboration between those ports, us thinking about them in a more strategic way, and how they could each work better to serve the people that live, in close proximity and in the region, I think would be really positive. That's something I'm hoping the report that the Greater Brighton Economic Board has commissioned on economic opportunities might pick up and look at in a bit more detail. Certainly when it comes to New Haven Port, that's currently French owned. I think, facing some challenges in terms of the legal case going on there. But I think we mustn't lose sight of what an important piece of infrastructure that is, giving us such a close connection to our French neighbours. I think it's probably quite underused and underutilised. I don't think there's been a huge amount of kind of vision and purpose brought to what that port might be for us. So I think there are loads of opportunities there, and I really see the ports as being central to that.
That's going to be really exciting. I mean, having sat on one of the Port Authority advisory boards, the work going on there is unrecognised, and it needs to be more recognised. And I think if the new structure can really integrate all this work, not just in our area, because I believe there are other areas outside Brighton and Hove. I'm not quite sure, but there are other ports. Other ports exist, as they say.
Thank you. I think that is everyone. So we are asked just to note the update report. Are we happy to do that?
Yeah, agree.
In which